Welcome back, my brave and beautiful humans, to another episode of Soul Hygiene. We've kind of been on hiatus for a little bit due to me being a little under the weather, but I am so excited to have my good friend, Mr. Tony Alonso, here with us today. He is returning. We've had him on here before, but there's so much to talk about and unpack when you're dealing with social work. So, Tony is a social worker with the school district in Illinois. So I'm excited for us to continue our conversation. I know we were talking a little bit before we started recording about just how social media has changed the aspect of thinking and really how people are not self-aware, how they are not self-reflective. Like it's just turn on your camera, record and record your whole day and not worry about like what you're saying, what you're doing. So it's in this day and age is just so important to be self-aware and to be able to manage who you are as a person. Um, there's just so much technology out there. So I know Mr. Tony and I are going to kind of delve into those two aspects. But welcome to the show, Mr. Tony. How are you doing?
Doing good. Glad to be back. Thanks for having me.
Oh, of course, of course. Um, so I know you started a new school year. How's the new school year treating you so far?
It's going pretty good so far. This last week was our first full week with students, so
Yeah.
we're kind of getting into the swing of things, getting routines down and that sort of stuff. For me, this coming week will be when I first start polling students for like their social work sessions and stuff. Last week I just kind of did a quick little, hey, I'm your social worker again, and kind of got my students' preferences for when they would like to be seen during the school day and that sort of stuff. But yeah, no, so far so good. I'm excited. We've got a lot of new teachers and stuff like that too. So, always something new. Always,
Right?
it's a good
Yeah.
time. I enjoy it. Like I said before, I wouldn't do anything else. So I really enjoy what I do, and glad to be back in the school year at this point. So
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, that's good. I'm glad it's going well for you. I know we had touched a little bit on the program, I guess, that I think you said it's a federal program, which I'm really it's called CASEL, CASEL.
mhm.
Um, and I'm when I was reading over it this morning a little bit, just getting familiarized with it. Um, I was actually surprised at how they incorporate it into the schools. I don't think there's been something like this before where they deal with the emotional and social aspect of, you know, how children incorporate themselves into school learning, into society. So, if you want to just expound on that a little bit, because, obviously you know a little bit more about it than I do, but kind of just how it works and how you incorporate that into their learning.
Yeah, so CASEL stands for the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. It's a nonprofit organization that's available anyone here in the United States and probably abroad too. I'm sure you could, look it up and use their stuff. Um, that's pretty much their whole focus is what's called social and emotional learning, which I know in some circles gets a really bad rap. I will say, working in the state of Illinois, school social worker, I'm of course going to have some bias on that. But for our state in particular, we actually developed our social and emotional learning standards, which is something that the state developed to basically say, okay, at this age, at this grade level, or what have you, you should be able to do these certain skills. And they really broke it down like, okay, a first grader should be able to do this, a second grader should be able to do this, and so on and so forth. Um, so the five different domains that Castle has are self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and then decision-making skills. All things that we as adults need in our everyday lives, regardless of our occupation and what have you. So truly, these are life learning skills that need to be developed. And as you kind of alluded to earlier, with the advent of social media, and I don't know what else is going on. There's so many different factors in our society these days, but I will say our students that are coming in have less and less of these skills, which is really sad and unfortunate. So the school is kind of taken upon itself to at least try to provide some of these baseline skills for students, and that's done through a lot of different ways. So I can expand as much or as little as you want. I'm very knowledgeable with this stuff, and I really enjoy it. I use it all the time. So
That's wonderful. I mean, I wish every school had someone like you who was really involved and really knew what they were talking about when dealing with the children. I kind of feel like sometimes social workers get a bad rap, or counselors where
mhm,
they're just there, they pick up extra classes and they don't do much, but when you think about it, they're the ones who have to talk your kids down. They're the ones that have to take your kids into the office and be like, okay, let's sit down. Let's, tell me what's going on. So, to have these, um, at least these 5 points that Castle incorporated, I think is a wonderful jumping off point when you're dealing with children who don't have these skills to begin with. So, the first one that I saw right on your list is self-awareness. And like I said, I see so much on social media. You know, not everyone's a narcissist. I'm going to put that out there. Everyone has narcissistic tendencies, but I think not having self-awareness almost makes those tendencies even more, you know,
pronounced.
yes, thank
Hmm.
you. Thank you for the word. Um, so I'm glad that you have this system in the schools before they become adults. Unfortunately, there's a lot of children on social media also recording themselves and putting stuff out there. So um maybe if you can catch them young and teach them what self-awareness truly is, we won't have a generation of just social media people who have no idea or clue about the real world. You know what I mean?
Hmm. No, for sure. I mean, self-awareness is, a lot of people think like when they're dealing with emotions, like, oh, you got to control your emotions. True, and that's where that self-management piece comes in. But a lot of people don't even realize, like, especially as adults, we tend to figure like, oh, I know how I'm feeling at any given moment. Well, I mean, really, truly, how often do we consciously check in with ourselves and go, okay, this is how I'm feeling in this moment, or I've got this really tight feeling in my chest, or whatever. Like, where is that coming from? Why am I feeling that way? And what am I feeling for that matter, too? So, being self-aware is so important, and as you kind of alluded, social media is just one of many places that we kind of get wrapped up in those things. How many people are just caught up in doom scrolling because they're trying to avoid a task or something like that, or even just getting into arguments online, especially we're getting closer and closer to the election. Those things, I try as we get closer to elections
Yeah.
to be like, you know what, nope, I'm gonna take a social media break because it's too toxic, because people are
Yeah.
just not aware of what they're putting out there in the world, regardless of which side of the aisle you might be on, or an alternative party or whatever. um it blows my mind that people talk to each other the way that they do, and it's like, okay, you do realize if this person was actually in front of you, you probably wouldn't be treating them like this, right? And it's just things like that. It falls into that self-awareness category, and like I said, unfortunately our students are coming in with less and less of that, so we have to teach them like, oh, when I feel that nervousness feeling, that's going to reflect in different people differently, but a lot of those common signs are like, you got the butterflies in your stomach, you can feel your heart rate is elevated, your hand might be shaking, those little basic things. um, that's just some stuff that some of the kids aren't picking up on. And then, okay, now that I know what I'm feeling, then how do I control myself and how do I manage that?
I think one aspect also when I was thinking about it while you were talking is when kids are younger, that's when they need to learn what their core values are. What do you believe in? Who are you as a person? Because you had mentioned politics in there, and it made me think, I'm also not a person who likes to argue politics. I will debate, I won't argue. I know what I believe, I know what my core values are. But I'm also not a person who sees, I don't know, other people as different. I love people's souls. I want their souls to just shine and for them to realize you have core values. You just have to learn what they are. And I think the self-awareness aspect is so, so important. And I'm glad it's like number one on the castle list here, because if you're not self-aware, everything else on that list doesn't really make any sense. It's not going to make any sense to you. So I think especially when they're younger, you know, they get 16, they're kind of already knowing who they are as a person and already delving into that aspect. But um I don't know, like I really, really think that self-awareness has a lot to do with your core values. Who you are as a person. What do you want to be? Who do you want to be? What do you want people to see you as? Or just stuff like that. And so I was really happy to see that self-awareness. Self-management also goes a lot right along with that. I did a couple of sessions with an emotional coach and really learned some really good things, because I went through 25 years of abuse, narcissistic behavior, whatever that looked like. And I was not self-aware of what was going on in me. Um, I knew how I felt, but I kind of brushed it to the side because I didn't want to deal with it. And I think that a lot of times when people are victims of abuse or trauma, which I know that you see in younger children who are going through it, I think they kind of turn that switch off and they're like, I don't want to deal with it. So I don't want to be self-aware of my emotions, my thoughts, my feelings, who I am. Like they just don't want to. And so they take on this either I've seen where kids just delve into these games and that's all they play, or they'll delve into social media, that's all they do, because they don't want to learn about themselves and how much better they can be outside of, their trauma and what's going on around them. And I know for me, that was a big thing. And when I learned what self-awareness was, I was shocked. I was like, whoa, I made all these decisions and wasn't even self-aware that I was making them for my children, for my future. Um, I think one good thing I heard last week, and it was on social media. Obviously, my whole platform's on social media, but I do watch myself how long I stay on social media after posting. But I heard this saying last week. It was there are habits. You can say, I have a habit. I have something that I do all the time. This is just who I am. Well, unfortunately, a habit's only a habit until you realize it's a habit. Then it becomes a choice. So I think that when people use that as an excuse, like, oh, this is just what I do, this is, obviously there's things that are addictive that are harder to not make a choice. But I'm talking about just being self-aware about your emotions, your thoughts, who you are. You know, if you have a habit of doing something, like for me, I had a habit of picking the wrong men, although I didn't realize I was doing it until I became self-aware. So if I become self-aware of my habit and my what I was doing, then if I choose the wrong person again, that was a choice I made because I knew in that, in that time that that wasn't a habit anymore. So I think there's so much to unpack with self-awareness, so many aspects to it. That I think self-awareness and self-management go hand in hand, which is why I'm glad they're like the first two on that list. Um, because young kids definitely it's this is something that you can get into their heads, it'll get into their hearts and hopefully affect the rest of their lives in a good way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's a lot to unpack there just with what you said too. I
I
mean,
know.
no, it's good though. I mean, so yeah, with self-awareness, a lot of times, at least the struggle I've seen, especially with students that have, gone through trauma and stuff like that. Granted, I work at a middle school, just so we're all on the same page there. So they're in that lovely developmental period too, where they are trying to like explore themselves and figure out who they are and find their values and what have you. So it's a challenging time all around for sure. And then you throw some trauma or what have you into the mix, and it's like, oh, let's dial that notch up to 10 with that. I had a kid that when I was and I we discussed that I do martial arts in the previous podcast, so I run an after school program at the school that I work with. So one of the students that I worked with a while back, just out of the blue, disclosed that he had been sexually abused, and it was not a good experience, obviously, for him and whatnot. Um, and he knew I was a social worker and stuff too. So we ended up unpacking that a little bit, and I had quite a few different conversations with him about, because he even disclosed that, yeah, there were some thoughts there maybe about using some drugs or alcohol or whatnot. I'm like, okay, well, I mean, you could make that decision, and that's not what I would recommend, obviously. But if you do that, you're just drowning it out temporarily. You're basically, limiting your self-awareness to these things and how you're feeling about it. You're using it to avoid having those feelings. And it's understandable because those feelings are not good to have. They're not fun. They're not pleasant experiences to, even just kind of think about and try to process through. Totally understandable, but you're putting a band-aid on a gunshot wound here, and you need surgery. You don't need to be just keep packing it in, and throw some dirt on it too. And that's the other thing too, like especially being a guy, a lot of times we're socialized, oh, you don't need to worry about how you're feeling, just suck it up and deal with it. Throw some dirt on it, rub some dirt on it, you'll be fine. you know when it's like, okay, to a degree, and depending on the certain context and situation, sure, like, to go to the upteenth millionth extreme, because I like using extreme examples. It kind of makes it painfully obvious. Like if I'm in the middle of a combat situation, yeah, I kind of need to rub some dirt in it and just keep going because I need to get through this and what have you. But when I go back to base and have some downtime, I need to be able to unpack that a little bit and figure out what's going on here. How am I feeling? How am I processing this? I know you've got a passion for veterans and stuff too. This is, I think, a big reason why we see such high rates of suicide in the veteran community and what have you. So self-awareness is huge. It's so easy to say and talk about, but it's so much harder to actually put into practice and go, okay, like, why am I actually doing the things that I'm doing? Why am I feeling this way? Or why do I constantly got to go back to the bottle or what have you?
Right.
Um, it's tough. It's absolutely tough. So, a lot of times as humans, we don't like to be uncomfortable, right? I mean, that's just kind of natural to try to avoid discomfort. And
Yeah.
whether that's I distract myself or I find a substance to use or whatever the case may be, we're eventually running away from something that's going to inevitably catch up with us one way or another.
Right. Well, and like I said, if you can get them young, if you can get them young and teach them what this is, how self-awareness and self-management will change their lives, you won't have adults with, like me, with PTSD and, all this trauma because they'll be like getting into a relationship, they'll see the red flags. They'll see, okay, how does this make me feel? How am I feeling right now being around this person? What type, I think being self-aware opens up a gambit of things within you. Like for me, when I really, really started my healing journey and said, I need to figure out all of this. And I didn't have this program. I just said, I sat down with my Bible or I sat down with a really good book or I talked to a therapist friend and we went through different things, emotional therapy, and we went through some self-awareness. What are your core values? Write them down. What where do you see yourself? Write that down. Starting with the basics of who you are on the outside. Now let's delve into who you are on the inside. Um, I think if children and even, young adults can get this in them and really understand it, we'll have a whole different kind of generation. Because from all of that comes kindness, comes compassion, comes understanding. All those good fruits of the spirit come from being self-aware, because then you're not being judgmental. You're not being hateful because you don't like that feeling inside of you. So I mean, we could probably do a whole year episode on self-awareness and self-management, honestly, because I think that's the generation we're in. And I think for self-management, you know, I created the 7 days of soul scrubbing. That's my self-management. That's what I do. I read my Bible every day. That's my self-management to keep me on track, to keep me, focused on what are my goals, my core values. And honestly, I think you're amazing when you take on these tasks, and having that after school program. That is awesome, because there's so many kids who don't have anything to do after school except go home and play video games or go home and get on their phones. So you have this program. I mean, I wish I had a program like that. you know they're also taking out their angst. They're also being able to, verbally just scream out these things. I know that you probably let them do that just to get
Yep.
that out of the system. But to be able to do that and then go home, okay, I got all that out. That maybe you may be I'm not going to say maybe, you are already saving somebody's life. Some child is not going to be the way he was headed towards, because you sit down with them and you're teaching them this and you're giving them that outlet. So, I mean, I appreciate that. I appreciate you for doing that. That's amazing to me.
No, like I said, I wouldn't do anything else. Even if I hit the lottery, I would still be doing the job that I'd be doing. Maybe
I
have a
know
little
you
bit
would.
more leverage, but
Yeah.
yeah, you
You
want to
can
fire
create
me
your
out
own
of this?
school
I
at
can
that point.
hire you. Yeah, maybe, or do like a community senator or something like
Yeah,
that. But yeah,
that would
no,
be
I mean,
just awesome.
yeah, for sure. And even within my regular day job too, we just did the meet the counselor and meet the social worker presentations, with this being the first full week of school. Um, and granted, the kids that I have this year I worked with last year too, so they all know who I am for the most part and whatnot. But even just to remind them, like, hey, yeah, if you're really upset about something, you can come to my office, you can yell, scream, get it out, you can cuss, whatever. I've got a punching bag in my office. Like, please come hit that instead of the person you're mad at or whatnot,
Right.
and get it out of your system, and then we can move on with our day. And everyone's self-management looks a little different. Like, you've got your 7 days and you read your Bible every day. For me, I like doing the martial arts stuff. I like going shooting personally. I find that to be very, like, because you got to focus on the target and
Right.
hitting it and that sort of stuff. I play airsoft so I can run and get the exercise in and kind of get some of the aggression out with combat sports a little bit that way too. And for me, some of it is, yeah, I'll hop on a video game and kind of just zone out and relax. And that was actually part of my introduction presentation too. And all the kids are like, "Oh, what games do you play and stuff?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I play a lot of boring games that you probably don't even know about, because I don't do multiplayer. For me, video games is my zen time. I chill, like, I kind of unwind. I can, do that stuff. I do a lot of like city building and real time strategy games and stuff like that. So I can kind of get that management and control piece out of my system a little bit. And then, I just kind of relax. So, and I have my routines, like, I want to wind down for my evenings and relax. I shut off screens like 2 hours before bed and stuff like that. I mean, just little things. And, of course, we encourage our students to do similar types of things, with just kind of finding what works for you, and then
Right.
do what you need to do, and I'll help you try to find what works for you, what those coping skills are, because that to me too, it just blows my mind when I have students that are like, yeah, I have no coping skills. after explaining to them what a coping skill is, because they've never heard of
Yeah.
that term. It's just it's like, wow, okay, we got to start from ground zero here and work our way up. Like,
Right. And
we'll
well,
make
some
it
of them, their coping skills is not suiting them. It's not
right,
helping them. Some of them may have coping skills, but they're negative coping skills.
right,
So teaching them the positive side of coping skills is, you
right.
know, because I do think that everyone has a coping mechanism,
True.
but
They're not always healthy.
for the most part, it's probably not suiting them or doing them any good.
Right.
So yeah. And the funny thing, a little bit off topic, but not really much. There's all these, what should we call them, like different areas in society now where it's like, if you don't agree with this person, then you're against them, and if you don't agree about this, then you're against it. And one area where I have recently become self-aware is in this um body positivity movement, where yes, you should be happy with yourself, you should be okay when you look in the mirror, um but we're praising obesity.
Hmm.
And my self-awareness literally in the last 6 months was, I'm overweight. I've been overweight all my life. I was a Michelin baby looking baby with all the fat. Okay. But to become self-aware and be like, you know what? I am not part of, yes, we should be positive about our bodies, but being self-aware that this isn't healthy, that we should not be putting it out there, that this is what healthy looks like, then you
Yeah.
need to do something. You need to change it,
Hmm.
you know? And skinny isn't healthy either. There has to be a
Right.
balance for you. But self-awareness has so much to unpack. So many facets to it. And I think that it has to so much to do with soul hygiene, that they go hand in hand. I think those two words, just because when you are self-aware, you start making better choices.
Hmm.
And that's the whole thing, right? You start, you have to know what your core values are. And then you start making better choices. Then you don't become the victim of every circumstance that you come across. You're able to stand tall and be like, you know what? This is how I feel. If you don't like it, I'm sorry about that, but and move
Yeah.
on past the situation, not, become the problem in the situation. So
Right. Not to get stuck. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, yeah. I think we're probably, I did talk to Tony before we started, and this is probably going to be like a 4 or 5 part series, because there's so much to delve into. And when I get talking, I start talking about my stories, and Tony has stories too about, mental health, and uh, men with mental health. I know we were going to touch on that topic a little bit, because I don't think that's talked about enough. But I so enjoy you. I love every time that we're on here, because I just learn. I just keep learning every time you're on here, and I really enjoy that. So um, I appreciate that. Is there anything else you wanted to leave the audience with, when we're talking at the topic we talked about today?
I think just, I would encourage the audience to really try to be more self-aware, and no one's going to be perfect and 100% self-aware at all times throughout their life. But, if you kind of find yourself getting a little heated, or you get that uncomfortable feeling, really just kind of, if it's safe to do so, you don't want to do meditation while driving or what have you, but, you want to be able to just check in and
Yeah,
go like, hey, why am I feeling this way? Like, why am I about to flip this other driver off? Because, like, is that really worth it? Like, do I have other things that I need to kind of deal with right now? That sort of stuff. So I would just really encourage your audience to just try as much as possible to tap into their own self awareness, and, kind of check in, even if things are going well too, just like because we want to do
Right,
more of that, right? So we want to
right.
feel that way generally. So, if things are going great, like, hey, why am I feeling this way? Like, what has gone on to get me to this point? So that would be my main point of encouragement. And then two, just for everyone to try to find some way that helps them manage themselves in a positive way, a positive coping skill
Yes,
that works for them. Even if you only can come up with one, hey, we all got to start somewhere, right?
right. I appreciate that because, I think a lot of people don't even know they do it, but you get so angry when things are going bad. And then you forget when things are going good to look at it and say, hey, things are good today. Why are things good today? What did I do differently this morning that I didn't do yesterday?
Right,
Um, so I love that you said that because I think we need to be self-aware in the good and the bad, but more so in the good because the bad sticks with you, right?
right.
When someone so I know like in my relationships, this is just as an off point, but I remember a lot of the negative stuff more than I ever remember the good stuff. And I think that's human nature, right? We
Absolutely.
tend to incorporate the negative things into our brains and into our hearts, but we can't remember the good things that happened.
Yeah.
So my mind switch, when I started my healing journey was I want to remember more of the good things.
Hmm.
I want to be more of the good things,
Right.
So I love that you said that. That's very true. Self-aware in the good and the bad.
Yes. That's
Yes,
important.
for
It is
sure.
important.
Yes. So, I will have Mr. Tony's information as we always do. I think we just put an email in there if you ever
Yeah,
want to reach out to him. He's not a coach or anything like that, like a life coach or an emotional coach on the his life is way too busy with the kiddos, but
for sure, for sure. But and I put it out there last time too.
yeah,
If you got a student maybe that it's got an IEP or a 504 plan, or you're trying to get that process going, feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to give you some pointers, or if you need help understanding a certain part or what have you. I know that world can be very confusing and very bureaucratic, and that's a good
yeah.
chunk of my life and my profession. So I'd be happy to help out for sure.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us again today. And we're definitely going to have more episodes here. Um, 5-part series at least. Trying to get all of this information in, but it's so important. And I think if some teachers can hear this and really incorporate some of this into their aspects of everyday life, it'll really make a difference for our young ones. So thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Soul Hygiene. We'll see you later.